The Brotherhood Moons are not just an all-consuming eldritch species hell-bent on wiping clean the entire galaxy, and given their size and network that they have built over the untold millennia, it's arguable that they may even spread just beyond the Milky Way. No, they are more than that. Given their intelligence and the intelligence that they seem to be able to mold and shape in a way that makes a farm species wasteful and disharmonious with their surroundings, this allows them to understand the very fabric of an animal's fear and panic. As species after species would discover the markers and have a necromorph outbreak, things would progress as they always would previously and very routinely. A race would be catapulted by the discovery of the marker and the limitless energy it housed, until finally a member of that species would notice something, their literal extinction barreling towards them with nobody else noticing. Arguably, every sort of race before it would have had its own form of resistance that would inevitably fail as they would be assimilated into a new Brethren Moon, becoming whole. This cycle that appears to have been going on for billions of years, given that it takes a while to farm an entire sapient race, who would then spread rather distantly and in great numbers to create the moon, would require some time to begin to process. However, humanity may have been different in some respects to other species that are out there. Taking what we have seen on Tau Volantis, this waterborne species, good lord, take a shot every time I say species considering it's, Thanksgiving break, you probably won't survive, but they would identify that the marker was a threat as a necromorph outbreak would begin on their planet, resulting in forms that must have been horrifying to see. However, what we have seen is there's not too many variants concerning their race. Typically, the necromorphs born out of the Tau Volantians retain all the same physiological traits as they had previously had, whether they were size of like a Goliath or simply the size of a few men. The point is, not much would change concerning their anatomy. With humans, this is different. For some reason, humanity appears to have had a different approach be set upon us in terms of overtaking our race. The reasoning behind this could have been seen in several different ways. The first is, we don't truly know whether another animal met their end and if it required more work to do so, which in turn would create their own variants. We also don't know if the Tau Volantians were just an easier species to overcome despite their technological advancements that would result in freezing the moon in place over their world, completely stopping the process from continuing for a time. What is known, however, is the variants seen to assimilate humanity are much more methodical and serve a purpose, whereas others do not. This seems to imply something about Homo sapiens in particular. Either we had too long to cook and spread too far, or something is unique about the human spirit, so to speak, and humanity largely was seen as something that may be able to overcome the marker signal. I mean, after all, we did actually learn how to contain the signal properly on Luna before Danik blew it up like a giant nerd, kicking off a necromorph outbreak on the moon and then subsequently on Earth. Due to the Brethren Moon's own egos, which assumedly I would probably say are cosmic at this point, it would be highly annoying to actively find any type of animal that you created resisting your plans to span the universe and become the only influence around. Now, why would they even want to do this though in the first place? It's really largely an unknown. The reasoning, methods, and desires as to what their end actually is a complete mystery. But what isn't a mystery is the decimation of any type of race or animal that was located on the planet with them at the time. Anything that rises up using the markers in turn would have it used against them. It is known that the Brethren Moons themselves can see through the eyes of the necromorphs, but what is interesting is, in the events of Dead Space 3, they appear to be having some difficulty locating Earth at first. Instead, they would go on to taunt Isaac, asking him to take them to Earth, saying that we are hungry. We know now this was simply a tactic to screw with Isaac and Carver so that they could not return Earth as quickly to warn everyone, but it still does seem at the beginning they truly had no clear view as to where Homo sapiens were located. This may actually hint at several concurrent species dealing with a necromorph outbreak in a universe, as they were not specifically able to locate this particular outbreak, which in and of itself is fairly horrific for anything located in the universe by and large. Upon finding humanity kicking off the new necromorph outbreak on the Ishimura, however, it would appear that direct intervention was necessary as new forms would be created to overcome the ability of humans to put distance between themselves and their altered colleagues. It may also be the fact that we had triggered necromorph outbreaks in the past, but then we kind of stopped them. So maybe the Brethren Moons at this point were like, all right, we really need to finish this time. To this end, structure breakers, guards, and those who could access small points on the ship to collect survivors and turn them would be created, leading to horrific-looking variants. It has been suggested on this channel prior that there are those who appear to be more punished than others in terms of their own transformation. Typically, living tissue is not necessary, and those who become the necromorph had already consciously checked out, which would probably be more of a blessing. their bodies would be reanimated and then used. However, it appears those that fight, or maybe who are just unlucky, would befall a more horrific fate. The corruption, as well as we all know, is a habitat changer. I will do an updated video over the corruption later, but for the time being, first, that one guy who complained that I was redoing Dead Space videos, it's only because it's been like asked 100 times that because the remake came out that I do them. But second, what is important to remember is this material is absolutely made out of human cells that are essentially cancerous at this point. They spread across any structures such as on the Ishimura or on a planet like Aegis 7. They use the marker signal energy to divide and grow, making the local atmosphere hostile to the native species, thus adding them into the fold of bioavailable material. We also know the marker changes the genes of a cell, which likely deactivates the tumor suppression genes, allowing for unprecedented growth. It became apparent to those working on the Ishimura that this material growing on the walls would begin popping up as their co-workers went missing over the next couple of days. However, the material that was available would far outclass the actual mass of a missing person and what they would contain. When tested by the scientists on board, they confirmed pretty quickly this material was made out of human cells, but it was not behaving like a human cell should. As time passed, as time tends to do, with the marker on board, which is never a good time, it was clear that the ship was under attack after the bridge was ransacked by something that took out pretty much all of the upper command, leading to absolute chaos. A resistance was formed on board within the ship, with those who were located further away from the marker surviving the longest, but ultimately it results in just a handful of people remaining by the time Isaac and his crew arrive. The fighting that would take place on board the Ishimura would not be an unknown to the Brethren Moons at this point, as a hive mind had already formed on Aegis 7, as the forms would become more horrific. As the corruption spreads, it appears some people would receive a fate worse than others, as previously mentioned. Those who actively fought, like the guy you run into with the flamethrower, would somehow be caught up in the corruption itself. A typical person isn't just going to go lay down in the meat pile willingly, considering a lot of those who were stuck to walls largely appear non-injured, at least not gravely injured, and it brings into question what they were doing there in the first place. This would ultimately result in a creature who appears very much so conscious and in constant agony, known as the Wall Guardian. The Wall Guardian is a non-moving, completely sessile variant of Necromorph that is beset in an area, and their entire purpose appears to be to control the flow of those entering a sensitive, room or hallway or anything. It may be for a multitude of reasons as to why this specific area was chosen, but what is more vague and a little more terrifying is the level of consciousness that a Wall Guardian appears to possess. Typically, a Wall Guardian begins its lifespan as someone who likely fought the influence of the marker and was in an area that was of some sort of importance to any resistance that may be operating. As they would fight the Necromorphs, some can be seen with tools still in their hands in an effort to finish their tasks. For this, either they were taken out by Necromorphs or they were overwhelmed by the voices in their head, which brought them to sit down in the corruption. The reason it appears to have happened this way is largely because of how intact that they actually are. As we know, Necromorphs don't really leave you that much intact. They don't care if anything's still attached where it should be. They just kind of go for you. So if you are pretty much good to go, and you can even see the outlines of your legs in the corruption and your upper torso still there, you probably weren't attacked. But what seems like with most, if you are slain near the corruption, you are absorbed. There is really nothing left of your original being outside of a vague outline of what you used to be. However, something would need to be special about those who still retain largely their human form and are still capable of moving and, more importantly, screaming. The immature form of Wall Guardian, or as I like to call them, the Proto-Guardian, is a form that appears very much so conscious. They have completely lost the lower sections of their bodies, either due to an attack or it has been fused with the corruption and broken down. I believe it to be the latter over the former due to a few things. First, the corruption can keep a body supplied with nutrients and cells as well as oxygen, but to do so, human tissue to the corruption needs to be corrupted so that it can communicate with the body. This would actually destroy the body as well. Talking about using osteoclasts to melt down bones, muscle is torn away from muscle as everything is used to fuel the corruption, and vice versa. The legs would be the most clear exposure point when a person enters an area, allowing for the infection to tear them apart, likely moving through their feet, and then begin going up their legs to the point that they would no longer be able to move them, and then they are rooted in place. This might be why they're actually leaning against the walls, because they cannot move, so they are leaning. Second, as to why I believe it wasn't an attack, because again, the consciousness appears preserved in the Proto-Guardian as it does not react like a typical Necromorph would. And it's also important to remember that if the corruption is moving up through the legs, it does take time to reach the brain. This would leave the brain the longest intact while the rest of the body would begin changing underneath it. So this indicates They never lost their life, they are in fact just changing. When interacting with your standard slasher, for instance, they can dodge, dip, duck, dive, and dodge. But they don't shield their eyes from light, as they're not really going to experience a stimulus effect from it. Take for instance yourself, right? When you wake up in the morning, have you ever noticed that you keep one eye open because it's bright before adjusting and then you open both your eyes? It's not that there's less light going in like one of your eyes as opposed to both of your eyes, because your pupil will constrict almost immediately. It's actually because the incoming sensory information via the optic nerve heading towards the occipital lobe is becoming somewhat overwhelmed. So closing one eye limits that sensory information until the brain can fully decipher what's going on, adapt, and then you can open both your eyes. So you have to ask yourself, with the brain actively deciphering jarring sensory information such as Isaac's flashlight in the face of a proto-guardian, is the brain still functional and alive? I believe the answer is yes. This person who is on the wall either participated or actively engaged in fighting necromorphs or some sort of resistance to the Brethren Moons. As a result, they are a sort of warning, but are also being formed to an ultimate end, which in turn could actually end up messing up those who they used to actively help, all while remaining conscious to what they are doing. As their lower half is fused into the wall along with their back, the corruption would begin to convert their cells in that area, and much like a torture technique which was used by like growing bamboo shoots through enemies in the latter half of World War II, tendrils will exit through the abdominal region as well as the thoracic, completely bisecting this area. The skin that they have will be split, and tendrils will now hang down, becoming offensive force enhancers later. During the growth period, the person will still possess their arms, which will be used to pull back the sides of their mangled abdomen. To this end, you have to ask why. It should be that the tendrils come out pretty easily, right? So why should it matter? This is another indication that this is a punishment to the person. Obviously, they would be in a great amount of pain, and this is still a pretty fresh wound. The tendrils are known to also have bony scythes beginning to form on them, and as they exit, this would slice the sides of the previous abdominal wall, which would be incredibly painful to the person. They simply cannot bleed out or suffocate at this point either, as they are being supplied everything that they need to grow by the corruption. The fact that they are actively keeping their brains functional as the transformation progresses into an even more horrific reality for the person is where they're going to constantly scream, kind of shows just how twisted this actually is. This process to go from Proto-Guardian to full-blown Wall Guardian does not appear to take more than just a couple of hours. Once being supplied by the corruption, their back continues to flay outwards, joining the corruption as it spreads deeper into their cells. Eventually their shoulders and arms are lost, with the arms seeming to disappear because at the back near the tricep area they will fuse to the wall, but if you look closely, you can see the remnants of them. Before the corruption overtook their bodies, they were still actively holding open their abdominal region to lessen any pain that they were feeling, which now appears as a bony plate surrounding the opening of the chest. As we approach the Wall Guardian, it's important to remember these things are highly lethal. As seen with several others who got close, the scythes on the tendrils can result in an instant decapitation. If you approach quietly enough and the Wall Guardian doesn't know that you're there, you will hear wails of pain, whimpering, and quiet noises of exasperation. Now, to some degree, it has been said that this noise, like whole purpose, is to draw people in, and the screaming that it occasionally emits is to attract others who are further away. In fact, one of my viewers summed it up pretty well. R390 GT1LM, if you're still watching, he suggested that it could be that the person is left alive and screaming to attract other people. Others hear the poor bastard in pain, stuck to a wall, and rush to help him, only to get their faces removed. Kind of like a sniper wounding another soldier and taking out anyone who comes to help him, which I tend to agree, but when approaching, that quiet noise that it produces would not attract too much attention onto itself. It's only after spotting you that it lets out a real scream of pain, probably more likely for you to basically mercy take it out. After coming out into the open and getting a look at this creature, you begin to see the horror that this person has experienced. Their legs, much like in their protoform, are completely gone. This man or woman has lost their feet, truly tragic for them, so there are no feet to examine first, but the lower portions of their body is simply a tail-like structure fused to the wall. As we move up on the remnants of the abdominal region, we begin to see something rather interesting. There is a protruding area that can fire out pods, which we'll get to what those may actually be here in a moment, and it's a fairly large opening, and it appears to also still be painful when opening up because, well, your body's not supposed to do that, or at least it's not supposed to do that without a great amount of pain. Look at pregnancy and birth. So as we move up, we see the remnants of the arms that are now a permanent fixture as the person tried to hold open their chest cavity, which eventually just became an exit point for the several tendrils contained within. As we move further up, there is a fully distinguishable head that has had the jaw moved down like over a foot in length, exposing the trachea and the back of their throat as the person emits a scream. The eyes are still present along with all the other facial features a person would normally have, it's just they're stuck in a meat blob. From here, once again, you have to ask yourself, why is it with all the other heavily altered forms of necromorphs, the faces are not really maintained, or other portions of the body have just become like, the face would become basically like the shoulder, and a new head is formed? It's because this is intentional. The person that is in there is still functional to some degree. They have a brain that is working and they feel everything. These screams may serve to draw in others, but it may also serve as a demoralizing point to any human running around. Showing an example of what a survivor could become, this would not only shake another person's resolve, but it would outright deeply disturb them, as well as making them easier to overcome with the marker signal, as they would be panicking. And if you're focused on this screaming meatball in front of you, you probably aren't noticing the leaper coming up behind you. It's clear the brain of this creature has no control over the body either. They are literally just locked in. Essentially, they are operating as a conscious meat puppet for the marker. The tendrils that come out of their body are pushed out through their body by the corruption reacting to what the person is seeing. So it's clear the sensory information is being interpreted and utilized, but again, this requires a functional brain to some degree. As these tendrils come out, the person will continue to scream in agony because it's just that, a literal representation of what it's probably like to be in hell. However, it is not just the corruption tendrils that the Wall Guardian has at its disposal. The aforementioned pods suggest things are even worse than you might initially think when looking at this thing for the first time. The marker does not care about the sex of a person, and anyone tacked to the wall could be male or female in reality. However, have you ever really gotten a good look at what these pods that are fired out of the abdomen are? If you get close enough, you can make out that there are legs on the backside, arms up front, and a deformed face with teeth and a mouth. Along with it, its back is very clearly like a mass of bone forming the spine, with the tendril likely being the spinal cord because it is nervous system tissue, and it appears the marker usually likes to go for that. This spinal cord will dig into the body of this malformed fetus, where it will pull out pieces of vertebrae and throw it at a survivor, damaging them in the process. Good God, that is messed up. There are a few ways to deeply disturb a species to its core. One is make an example of them, such as with the Guardian, and another way is to mutate their offspring into these creatures that attack, whose only purpose is to dig spinal fragments out of their own back, and then once they have incurred enough damage, they just explode. It's clear the pods are likely a fusion of eggs from a woman who are assimilated into the corruption and the sperm from some men. Considering everyone lost their lower half, this isn't too distant of a conclusion to jump to either. The reality is, while the Wall Guardian serves a purpose, its real purpose is to unsettle any person that comes across it, while also protecting the area and blocking off corridors, vents, or entry and exit points that a person may need. But speaking of, the Wall Guardian will look at you and say, "Oh, you're approaching me?" Which of course you are, right? You need to get relatively close to kick the Guardian's ass. The problem is, however, this is a trap. The Wall Guardian, as the name implies, it's a guardian. The tendrils will shoot out, and they're really for defensive purposes if the pods do not work to deter a person. But these same tendrils are biologically spring-loaded, much like a pistol shrimp to a degree, and as they shoot out, the scythe comes out faster than a person could even register. It strikes so quickly that a person in a fraction of a second, armor or not, is instantly decapitated. The body of the person at this point will lose connection with the brain so quickly that the only response left is the spinal arc, which is based on a knee-jerk reaction. Like if you burn your hands, right? The motor neurons have to go through your spine first. If your spine determines this isn't good, we're being damaged, it won't even ask the brain to pull away your arm. It will immediately pull away your arm, and then the pain will hit you. That's why you can pull your hand or your leg out of something that's burning you or hurting you before you even register the pain. But the arms will shoot up, feeling for the wound, showing the brain is not involved in the movement here at all because there's no head anymore. The body will take a few steps before succumbing to the life-ending wound. Probably around this point, because it was so quick, you would very likely still be in shock, but you would still be conscious as your head rolled around on the ground. You wouldn't even know what happened to you. It was just, you would be looking at them, and then all of a sudden you would be turned sideways and you couldn't move because your head on the ground. Of course, you have to ask yourself now, who would approach this thing when you've got a nice flamethrower or plasma cutter? As you destroy the tendrils of the body, eventually the Wall Guardian will have no more left, rendering the person's usefulness at an end. It seems at this point, the corruption will abandon this resource draw due to the dismemberment internally. the person will finally be released from the literal hell that they are confined to as the corruption stops sending nutrients and oxygenated blood to the brain, allowing for the brain to finally lose consciousness as the Wall Guardian lets out a scream of relief as they finally meet their end. The Wall Guardian is absolutely, unequivocally a horrific nightmare for a person. This person shows that while the Brethren Moons do have an end goal for a species that they are attempting to assimilate, they are not completely indifferent to that species' suffering. The problem is the way they aren't indifferent is actually just straight up sadistic and imposes more upon the individual. I mean, a case could be made that the Brethren Moons really just like screwing with everybody, and they like the fact that a species is completely terrified at the end there. This is exactly why we needed Dead Space 4, so that we could ultimately take the fight to the Brethren Moons, where we would use planet crackers on the moons themselves to tear them apart, creating some serious poetic justice considering you also have to tear apart necromorphs. But luckily, even with the remaster out, which was a welcome change and Motive just absolutely knocked it out of the park, EA is still a giant sleazeball for disbanding Visceral. Truly the worst timeline that we ended up with because it resulted in Callisto Protocol. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the Wall Guardians are still conscious? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like is a great thing for, me, obviously, because it gets the video out there. And it's also greatly appreciated, so it's not just a great thing, it's thank you if you do that. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on what I post. I'll drop my merch, Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel links for Roanoke Tales, where this week we're talking about the Wolf Siege of Paris. I was supposed to do that last week, totally forgot. Also, 2024 is going to be the year of streaming. I'm going to bring back streaming, and I'm going to actually do it like for real and not screw it up. So come join me. I'll be streaming on like Roanoke Games, which is my YouTube channel, and then Roanoke Games on Twitch. I'm also on Facebook now because I'm a boomer. Yeah, it is what it is. But anyways, speaking of patrons from earlier, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death Dancer. Thank you, bro. Next up, our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Dakota23, Florian Lacune, Lucian Dren, Octavia Serpentia, and the last final girl on the left. Thank you guys as well. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. Have a great Thanksgiving, and I will see y'all in the next one.